This key is for your study guide for CFA 2, so it's important that you paid attention during our live lesson as well as watch this video on understanding all these problems here so that you can do well on the test. Your test will only be 5 questions, but the study guide's probably a little harder because I put more questions in it. So I want to go over it. It's only one standard NS1. You're either going to pass it or you're not going to pass it, so you need to pay attention here. Number 1 says to consider the expression 12 divided by 12/13 using words. Explain what this problem means. Solve and defend your answer. So 12, which would be 12 over 1, divided by 12/13. And when you solve it, because that's the one thing I want you to do is solve it and defend. Don't forget to solve. So 12 over 1.
Ron, could you please call the office if you have a moment?
Sorry, at school here. So 12 over 1, instead of dividing by 12/13, we need to multiply by its reciprocal, which is 13 over 12. If you simplify your diagonals, both the 12s here, when I circle them and I simplify them, they can both become 1s. And so that's where I get 1 times 13 on the top and 1 times 1 on the bottom, which is really just 13. So what do I mean by solve and defend? Well, instead of dividing by 12/13, it's the same as multiplying by its reciprocal, 13 over 12, and the answer would be 13. So you're explaining why you're changing a division problem into a multiplication problem. Number 2, Megan solved the following problem. She got 2 1/4 as her quotient. Did she come up with the correct answer? Explain why or why not. And you should be saying no, she forgot the 0. When she does this problem, what is the quotient when she takes 324 and divides it by 16? Well, you're going to get 20 1/4. So let me show you how that works. 324 divided by 16 goes in 2 times. So that's above the 2, and that gives us exactly 32. When I subtract and I bring down the 4, 16 does not go into 4. This is where she went wrong. She forgot what above the 4? She forgot it as 0. 0 times 16 is 0, and then I get a 4. That's my remainder. Put a fraction bar. The 4 goes over the top, over what she's dividing by 16. This can be simplified down. 20 4/16 is good, but there's something better. And if you divide them both by 4, you're going to get 20 1/4. So she thought the answer was 2 1/4. The answer is actually 20 1/4. She forgot the 0 when she was dividing. So that's what you would need to say here. Did she get the right answer? No. The next one's 5/8 divided by 5/8. So I've written it as a division problem. Instead of dividing by 5/8, we're going to multiply by its reciprocal. So 5/8 is now multiplied by 8 over 5, and I flipped it. And when you simplify all your diagonals, you're going to get 1s all the way around, and 1 over 1 is just 1. 4/5 divided by 5/6. Instead of dividing by 5/6, we are going to multiply by its reciprocal 6/5. So the first one stays, and then you change it to a multiplication problem. 4 times 6 is 24. 5 times 5 is 25. A lot of kids try to dump and divide this. This is not an improper fraction. This is in simplest form, and you're done right there. The next one is 7 divided by 3 1/2. And this is tricky because the 7 is a whole number and you're trying to divide by 3 1/2, but you have to remember to check mark this and make it an improper. So 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1. So instead of saying 3 1/2, you're taking 7 divided by 7 halves. So now instead of dividing by 7 halves, you're going to multiply by its reciprocal, which is 2 over 7. So your 7s, when you simplify, these cancel out, and they both give you 1s, and then you would just have a 2 on the top for your answer is 2. Move this up so you can see. Number 6, 2 1/10 divided by 1 1/5. And there's a lot of work on this particular problem. You have to check mark both the 2 1/10 and the 1 1/5 and make them both improper. This is still a division problem. Instead of 2 1/10, you would get 21 over 10, and instead of 1 1/5, you would get 6/5. This is still a division problem. Instead of dividing by 6/5, you're going to multiply by its reciprocal. So I have 21 over 10 times 5 over 6. Now I flipped it. Now I'm ready to simplify your diagonals and multiply. And you can simplify both diagonals going both directions. You can divide the 5 and 10 by 5. You can divide the 6 and the 21 both by 3. So then you get 7 times 1, which is 7, and 2 times 2 on the bottom is 4. 7/4 you cannot leave, so you need to dump and divide. 7 divided by 4, and you get 1 3/4 as your answer. Number 7 is tricky. A lot of people miss this one because they think 7 is part of the problem, but it's really not. It's 3/4 divided by 1 7/8. So 3/4 divided by, instead of 1 7/8, I did the check mark, and that's 15 over 8. This is still a division problem. 3/4 divided by 15/8. But instead of dividing by 15/8, I need to multiply by its reciprocal, which is 8 over 15. And I can simplify both diagonals here and make these both smaller, and I would get 2/5. The story problem that you could write here on your own could be just like this story problem, could be just like this story problem, or it could be just like this story problem, or like the ones that we worked on, where we have 7 1/4 squares and you want to divide it by 3 and ask how many pieces would I have. So 7 1/4 ends up being 29/4. Instead of dividing by 3, you're going to multiply by its reciprocal, which is 1/3. You get 29/12, and when you dump and divide, you actually get 2 and 5/12. Sorry, that 2 kind of looked like it was on the top. 2 and 5/12. So if you had to call it pieces, you would label it pieces. If you were doing something like this, you may have to label it puppets. It just depends on what story problem you use. But you should be able to write your own story problem, having a total, divide by a part, and then ask how many parts or pieces you would have in your total, just like those story problems we practice. This example, he's got 5/8 yards of material to make one puppet. So since this is for the one puppet, this is actually your part. They're asking how many puppets can they make from the 15 yards of material. 15 is your total amount. You're going to divide it by the 5/8, which is what you would use to make one puppet. So your total is 15, dividing it by 5/8. So instead of dividing by 5/8, you're going to multiply by its reciprocal, which is 8/5. And then when you simplify your diagonals, your 15 and 5 can both be simplified down. You get 24/1 for 24 puppets. So this one was tricky because they gave you the part first and the total second. But how did I know this was my part? It was talking about one puppet or each puppet. That was my clue that told me this number was my part. And you take your total and divide by your part. The next one is very tricky. To make 11 blankets, they're using 5 1/2 yards of material. How much material did she use for each blanket? The key word is each blanket, which refers back to which part of the problem talked about blankets? Right here. This talked about blankets. So 11 is actually your part, which is weird because it sounds like it should be your total. And your 5 1/2 yards of material is actually the total amount that you have. So a lot of people have these numbers switched around and they try to take 11 and divide by this, and that's incorrect. You need to take 5 1/2 and divide by 11. So 5 1/2 divided by 11, when you do the check mark here, is actually 11/2. And then instead of dividing by 11, you're going to multiply by reciprocal 1/11. So then your 11s are both going to simplify down, and you get 1/2 yards of material. If you get the answer 2 here, then you have it switched around. You have the part divided by the total instead of the total divided by the part. You should get 1/2 yards of material. So they're asking how much material did she use for each blanket. Each blanket is only 1/2 yard of material, which is a very small blanket for 1/2 yard. The last one is probably one of my favorite story problems, and this is probably the one I would choose if I had to write my own story problem over here. You have a piece of lumber, which is this long, and this is your total. And you're going to figure out how many boards you can cut, which is your key word that you're cutting. If each board, there's another part that's telling us, the part's coming up. Each board is 5/8 feet long. So your total is 7 1/2, and you're going to cut it into 5/8 size pieces or boards. So you're trying to figure out how many boards you would have. Total, 7 1/2, divide by 5/8. You check mark 7 1/2 so that you get 15/2. Instead of dividing by 5/8, you're going to multiply by its reciprocal, 8/5. You can simplify both your diagonals here, and you're going to get 12/1, and you're going to have 12 boards. How do I know to label it boards? Because it says how many boards would you have. The question tells you how to label this one. This one said how many puppets, so that's how you labeled puppets. So if you can do this study guide, then you should be good for the test. If you need to watch this video again or redo the study guide again, please do so to help you out for your test on dividing fractions. It is one standard.